I'll call this meeting to order. It's a regularly scheduled meeting of the Transportation Public Works Committee. I am chairing the committee. I'm Councilmember Reich. I'm joined by my colleagues, Councilmember Yang, Glidden, Bender, and Gordon. We are quorum and may proceed with today's agenda. Before us, we have public hearings, consent, and a discussion item. I will go through the consent items. Any committee member can pull them if they wish. Consent item number 3 is the Warrington Area Residential Resurfacing Project, amending project designation. Item 4 is the 8th Street Reconstruction Project, contract with Alliant Engineering for engineering and design services. Item 5 is the East 38th Street Reconstruction Project agreement with the Minnesota Commercial Railroad for crossing surface installation. Item 6 is the road maintenance agreement with Hennepin County. Item 7 is the Central Labor Light Rail Project amendment to the subordinate funding agreement. Item 8 is the contract amendment with Moricon Construction Company for elevator modernization at various parking ramps. These will work at City Hall too. Item 9 is TAP Minneapolis Portable Drinking Water Fountain Permit and Equipment Applications. Item 10 is the Hennepin County Bicycle Sidewalk Ramp Program Funding Application. Item 11 is the bid for fine aggregate, and that's accepting the low bid from Fisher Mining LLC. Those are the items, committee members. I will move all items. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the consent item say aye. Dissenting nay. We can now move to our public hearings, beginning with public hearing number 1, which is the Standish Area Residential and Howe Area Residential Resurfacing Project approval and assessment. Good morning, Director Cockey.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Mike Kennedy, our Director of Transportation Maintenance and Repair, will do this presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Mike Kennedy. I'm the Director of Transportation Maintenance and Repair for Minneapolis Public Works. We're here this morning for the public hearing for the Standish Area Residential Project, 5279C, and the Howe Area Residential Project Resurfacing Project, 5279D, public hearing. On January 15th, 2016, the City Council designated the locations, streets, and improvements proposed to be made in the 2016 Street Resurfacing Program, and included were the Standish Area and Howe Area residential projects. The locations of the projects are as shown on the map I put on the overhead. We essentially have one project here and one project here that match the old residential paving project limits. The proposed street resurfacing special assessments were determined by applying the 2016 uniform assessment rates of 63 cents per square foot for non-residential properties and 21 cents per square foot for residential. The proposed total assessment amount for the Standish area and Howe area residential resurfacing project is $2,068,999.30. There was a committee pre-public hearing meeting held on February 23rd. Our proposal today is that our recommendation today is passage of a resolution ordering the work to proceed and adopting special assessments in the amount of $1,137,493.70 for the Standish area residential and $931,505.60 for the Howe project, as well as passage of a resolution requesting the Board of Estimate and Taxation to authorize the city's issuance and sale of assessment bonds in the combined amount of $2,069,000 for these projects. That concludes my presentation. If there are any questions, I can take them.
Thank you. Are there any questions per the presentation? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing. We have one person signed in. Anyone else can sign in with the clerk. So we'll begin with Carol Hughes. Please come forward, state your name and address for the record.
Good morning. I am kind of a representative, I guess, for the Dight Avenue site that is proposed for resurfacing. And we have signed a petition objecting to this particular repair being done because it is a very short piece of Dight Avenue, 2 blocks, which the assessment we think is quite high. And we have registered a petition against it, and hopefully we can resolve the issue. I have a separate issue myself, being that I own 3 lots on this street on 42nd and Dight. And I've been there for 40 years. I do not recall of ever doing anything to the street. And I know it's in sad repair, but, you know, the cost of doing that is, I think, excessive. And my portion of that assessment is double of anybody else on those blocks. So I'm a little concerned about the cost. And hopefully that, we can come to an agreement to either lower the assessment or delay the project. Because looking at the map, it certainly does not look like it's an integral part of the other area that is being proposed. So I guess if you have any questions.
No, thank you. Thank you for your testimony, and we do have your petition for the record.
Okay, and I would like to request, if this does not stop this project, if, which I assume that one way or the other, something will be done. For the repayment, I would need an extension.
I think we do have provisions. As a matter of fact, staff is here. We have provisions for that under certain circumstances, and you can discuss with staff directly for your situation.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak on this matter before us? Anyone else wish to speak? See none, I'm going to close the public hearing. Anyone wish to discuss this further? Well, seeing none, I will move this item. All in approval, say aye. Dissenting nay. That carries, and you can discuss with the staff person that's right next to you. Thank you. Moving to our next item is item 2. It's the Unpaved Alley Resurfacing Program west of Xerxes Avenue between 28th Street West and Cedar Lake Parkway.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to introduce Adam Hale. He is our project engineer in our Transportation Engineering Division and will be making this presentation.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and council members. My name is Adam Hale. I'm an engineer with the Transportation Engineering and Design Division of Public Works. I'm here today for the public hearing for the Unpaved Alley program. The Unpaved Alley is located west of Xerxes Avenue between Cedar Lake Parkway and 26th Street West. The alley construction is scheduled for 2016. Public Works designed the project considering public input, which included a public meeting held on August 6, 2014. Public Works held another public meeting last Tuesday to provide information about the special assessments, method, and process. Today, Public Works is asking City Council to pass resolutions ordering the work to proceed, adopting the special assessments, authorizing sales of the assessment bonds. And that'll be it. Any questions?
Any questions for the presentation for this project? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing. Anyone wish to come forward? Anyone sign in? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and move the item. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Dissenting nay. That passes. And we can now go to our discussion item of the day, which is the last item on our agenda.
Mr. Chair, our Deputy Director of Public Works, Lisa Cerny, will make the presentation today. The intent is that we felt that we just wanted to brief the council on the street conditions in Minneapolis and kind of what we're referring to as kind of the forecasting of the street conditions over the next 10 years in Minneapolis.
Thank you, and good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Lisa Cerny. I'm the Deputy Director of Public Works. This morning, I'm going to update you on the street conditions of our Minneapolis streets. Before I get into those conditions, I want to start out by mentioning all of the different levels of roadways that exist in the city of Minneapolis and their associated ownership and maintenance responsibilities. The levels of streets range from interstates and trunk highways, which are shown in the blue and the black lines on this map, I know it's small and maybe hard to read, but those are owned by the Minnesota Department of Transportation, also known as MnDOT. The green lines are county lines owned by Hennepin County. And then the remainder of the streets are City of Minneapolis and are classified as either MSA or municipal state aid, residential or local streets, and the alleys are not shown on this map. So a little more about the network that we, the City of Minneapolis, are responsible for. This pie chart shows the distribution of miles within the city system. MSA streets can be described as providing an integrated and coordinated street network within the city's limits. It's composed of streets that generally carry higher traffic volumes and connect major points of interest. As an example, most of our downtown streets are on that MSA system. Residential streets can be generally thought of as neighborhood streets, and local streets are lower volume and generally industrial street segments. PCI, the technical tool used to evaluate street conditions, is called Pavement Condition Index, or PCI. It's a numerical value ranging between 0 and 100. It generally indicates the pavement condition based on visual survey. And so what I really want you to understand with that is that means that the rating focuses on the surface condition of the pavement. 100 represents new or pavement in very good condition. As the numbers decrease, so does the condition of the pavement. I'm going to show you a few pictures to help. So this photo is a photo of a street segment that has a PCI of 82 and is in good condition. You can see that it's a relatively smooth street surface. This one is a little further down on the chart. It's a PCI considered fair condition, and you can see a few more cracks on the surface. Here's an example of a concrete street that has a PCI of 44. There are many cracks that have been patched and an uneven street surface. So in 2014, the average PCIs of our network ranged from 46 on our alleys to 71 for our residential streets. It's key to understand that this is an average, so what that means is street segments in each of these could be higher or lower than the number you see on the chart. Now I want to share a little more detail about streets in general. This graphic represents a typical cross-section of a street. Under the streets, the red box highlights the typical zone for utilities. There are both public utilities, like water or sewer, and private utilities, like gas and communication lines. Those utilities are aging, and we need to collaboratively address their needs as we do our street conditions. Also not shown, but a very important piece of the utilities, are private connections between the mainline utilities and residential and commercial properties. This slide might be a little technical, but streets are made up of layers, and I'm going to work from the top down. There's a pavement surface, which can be a layer of bituminous or concrete material. The orange arrow is pointing to that top layer on the graphic. This portion of the pavement is where the PCI rating is focused. If you live on a bituminous street, there's likely a second layer of bituminous, which the green arrow highlights. Below the bituminous or concrete is Class 5 aggregate, which creates a solid base or a foundation for the two pavements that I mentioned earlier above. Depending upon the native soil that that street is situated in, deeper excavations may be necessary to, again, create, to help support that base of the pavement. So what's important to remember from this slide as I go forward is that the PCI is that surface rating. is a rating based on the surface. It doesn't take into consideration what's below the surface. Also, remember that pavement surface generally ages faster than the base as a result of traffic or other environmental impacts. Although eventually the entire pavement depth does wear and need updating or reconstruction. Now that you have a little more background on pavement, I'm going to walk through the life of a pavement in steps along this PCI line chart and show some photos of activities that are performed to help extend the life of pavement. It's also important that this is an average line. Each segment can follow a different path as a result of various different conditions. The base, underlying soil conditions, quality of materials, types of vehicles using the streets, and underground utilities. The blue arrow is where a new street starts, top left, 100 ranking. As I go through this, we're going to move to the right. So here's a photo, or a couple photos, of some newly constructed streets at the beginning of their life. You can see that the pavement surface is very smooth and clear of defects. Over time, pavement surfaces wear, and we perform preventative maintenance activities with the goal of maintaining high PCI ratings and also extending the pavement life. The first pavement or preventative maintenance activities typically include crack sealing and seal coating. The goal of these activities is to limit moisture, meaning rain or snow melt, from getting below the surface and causing freeze-thaw movement, creating cracks and potholes. Again, as the pavement continues to age, the surface shows more wear, reducing the PCI, and as the PCI is reducing, that often means that more intense work is necessary to increase the PCI. Oftentimes we call that resurfacing. This activity is a little more intense and disruptive. Resurfacing removes the top layer of bituminous and puts a new one down. The outcome is a new smooth surface, again bringing the PCI back up to 100. Resurfacing can also be done in alleys. Crack sealing and seal coating can be repeated through the pavement life or through the life of a pavement. It will increase the PCI and help extend the life. Eventually, the entire pavement depth wears out and must be reconstructed, as you can see in the photos. Patching potholes becomes costly and less effective. Reconstruction is the best time to address underground utility conditions and upgrades. These photos show complete pavement removal up in the upper left, removing the soil in order to create a good base, as well as addressing underground utility needs, so you can start rebuilding and move and replace the pavement surface, once again bringing the PCI back up to 100. You can kind of see I've just walked through a cycle. New road, maintenance, preventative maintenance activities, resurfacing, and once again, a new street. Street reconstruction history. The city went through an intense construction and reconstruction phase of our streets starting in the 1960s. About 30 miles of street were constructed annually through the 70s, and then decreasing closer to about 10 plus miles per year, but remaining steady through the 1990s. The pavement constructed in the 1960s is now about 50 years old and is approaching the end of its life cycle, meaning that there are a large number of miles that need to be reconstructed in the foreseeable future.
Oh, yeah. Councilmember Clayton?
Thanks. It just piques my curiosity with the largeness of that number of streets that were constructed and reconstructed. Was there something special that happened financially to support that level of investment at that period in time? So I was just curious, how did that happen? Was that the city using its property tax authority, or did we get special assistance from the state for this level of investment?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Glidden, I am not aware that there was any additional funding or new revenue sources coming in. I think it had more to do with the need. This is our residential paving program, and over the years, we actually had what we refer to as oil dirt streets. So the residential streets in Minneapolis were never actually properly paved. And the condition of the residential streets by the early 60s were so poor that it was decided that we are going to take on actually rebuilding all the residential streets in Minneapolis. So I think the issue was more, it was driven by very much a large need and not necessarily any additional revenue sources. And it's my understanding is that the revenue sources that we use for the residential paving program are very similar to what we use today, which was about a 25% special assessment and 75% net debt bonds.
Just, again, kind of the proportion, too, of how much you would be bonding for that much work just makes me, I'd be curious to know a little bit more about how that happened. So.
Another way of demonstrating the reconstruction need is on this line chart, and it's broken out into the categories of residential, local, MSA, and alley. The numbers aren't the key piece to this chart. The key to this chart is the downward trend of each network type as it's been modeled under our current funding projections. The current budget structure or funding level isn't enough to reach the goal of maintaining an average PCI of 70. It's also key to understand that that yellow line doesn't mean that every street would be at 70. At the same time, there would be, again, some higher and some lower, with the goal being the average of 70. In summary, in order to achieve the goal of an average PCI of 70 for our streets in 10 years and then maintain them at that level, an additional $30 million investment annually is needed. The largest gap, as I have alluded to in this presentation, is investing in the number of miles of streets we need to reconstruct. Today, we have about 10% of our system below a PCI of 50, meaning the only option to improve the pavement condition of those segments is to reconstruct. With that, I'll close for questions.
Any questions for the presentation? Councilor Glidden.
So maybe just refresh us on, for those that are below the PCI of 50, how do they spread out between the types of streets that you've been utilizing in this presentation, between residential, or I can't remember all your designations because they're on the slide previous. But.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Glidden, I don't have an exact breakdown of which category they're in. I've lumped them all into the same, or into one category to make that statement of 10%.
Okay. And can you remind me again, how are you distinguishing between residential and local?
The residential are generally your neighborhood streets, and the local are more your industrial low-volume streets.
Like 38th Street? Would that be a local?
38th is an MSA.
38th? Okay, well, anyway, so that might be a confusing distinguishment between the local and the MSA, just because that's more about your funding source, ability to use that funding, MSA funding source.
Madam Chair, or Mr. Chair, Councilmember Glidden, a good example of a local is like the mid-city industrial segments that are in Northeast Minneapolis. And MSA funding does help fund or provide funding towards rebuilding of MSA streets that are in that classification.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So how is our current needs reflected in our capital program, knowing that we have this gap? Are we focusing funding on, I imagine we're focusing some funding on reconstructions where they are most needed, and also still trying to not let some of the additional roads get below that 50 PSI mark where we know we'll need to do a reconstruction in the future. But could you elaborate on that and just sort of let us know, or maybe another way to phrase it is, what happens if we do not fill our $30 million gap?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender, the way that we are selecting projects right now is we're using a criteria to prioritize different street segments. There's priority or criteria around outside funding sources, obviously condition and need, and at the end of the day, we have to make choices. And if you want more detail, Ms. Hager could come up and talk more about that criteria.
Mr. Chair, Council Member, our approach literally over the last, I would say, 8 years has been, we've been recognizing this issue, and we've been focusing primarily on what I call resurfacing, so that that's been where we've been spending a lot of our money. Currently, we probably do maybe 1 to 2 miles of reconstruction a year, and that's primarily just because the cost of reconstruction is so high. So we have been focusing very heavily on the resurfacing. However, we are reaching the point now where what I'd say the candidates of our street system that really are in need of resurfacing is starting to drop and are really falling more into the category of we need to start doing more reconstructions. This is particularly true on what I call our arterials or MSA routes. I think moving into the future, we'll continue doing resurfacing. That'll probably continue more in the residential area, but the needs right now, and especially over the next 5 to 10 years, is going to be a lot in reconstruction in our MSA or arterial streets.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In our last federal transportation bill, I know that federal funds have been shifted primarily to our interstate system. Are we seeing ramifications of that in the funding available to our MSA roads through the state? And do we anticipate in the future that we may need to use more local funds for what has typically been funded by federal and state dollars? I may go a little beyond our presentation, but I just know it's an issue out there. So I'm concerned that in the future our need may even increase more.
Mr. Chair, Council Member, let me see if I can answer your question. As far as MSA is associated with gas tax, and that's what we get from the state. It's been challenging because I think the size of the city is if you're 5,000 or greater, you're eligible for those MSA funds. So those MSA funds that the state distributed, there's a lot more competition for those. So the amount of money we're getting in MSA is not growing compared to what our needs are. So those are not federal dollars; those are state dollars.
Councilmember Glidden.
So I had 2 questions. One is, as I was just sitting up here, I was remembering that the resurfacing program actually is not a very old program. I mean, maybe we did something like this many years ago, but this resurfacing program was actually adopted during the time I've been on the council, so it's not very long ago that we determined to use this additional technique of preserving our streets at least somewhat longer. So I was curious if there are any other techniques that are being evaluated by Public Works that are being used in other cities to, again, try to find all the ways that are possible and financially responsible to preserve the lifespan of our streets. And I only just say that because resurfacing is a fairly new program in the city of Minneapolis. Then my other question is, do we have any idea of how our street condition and with the types of streets and their condition compares to that of other cities in the state of Minnesota? So, clearly we are an older city than some cities, but I have to believe that these are similar challenges that are being faced throughout the state, but I could be wrong, and the level of need may just be greater in a city such as ours, again, because of our age and other things like that. But so I was curious where we're at in understanding that.
Mr. Chair, I'll go ahead and jump in here again, Council Member. As far as the question, as far as how we compare to other cities, I don't have that information specifically, but generally, I think it's safe to say that the problem that we have here is not unique to the city of Minneapolis. The issue of aging infrastructure and street systems and dollars to bring the condition of those streets up is an issue I think that most cities are dealing with, as well as the counties in the state. So we're not unique from that perspective. As far as the actual comparison of our average PCIs to others, I think it will vary depending on the city that you look at. There are some cities that have kind of taken steps as far as putting in what I'd call a more secure funding source for maintaining their streets and rebuilding their streets. There's other cities that are a bit more challenged with that. So it varies from city to city, but we could get you that information. As far as the issue of are there any other techniques similar to resurfacing, one of the things we wanted to show you, we can put on the overhead there if they could turn the. Very good. Maybe you can adjust that, Lisa. What you see in this graphic is the street paving history that you saw previously, but the blue line is really some of what we call renovation, but also resurfacing. So you're right, we really did not embark on the resurfacing program till I think it was around 2006, 2007 that we really took off on that. And then where you can see it peaked